Welcome to the Be All You Can Be MSC, the podcast dedicated to empowering Army Medical Service Corps officers and professionals like you. I'm your host, Stephanie Moore. So before we jump into today's episode, I just wanted to tell you all, the audience out there, thank you so much for your continued support. It has been a humbling experience being able to bring these amazing officers and share all of their knowledge and experience with you. I appreciate the feedback that I get. It helps me ensure that I deliver the content that you are looking for. Now, I am really excited for you to listen to this episode. Had an opportunity in August to sit with one of my mentors, Colonel Jason Hughes, in person and have a candid conversation regarding mentorship, leadership, and our combined thoughts on it. So I hope you enjoy, and happy holidays to you all. On today's episode of the Be All You Can Be MSC podcast, we welcome an amazing leader and guest. He's also a mentor to me, Colonel Jason Hughes, the 6th MLMC commander. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Stephanie. Truly appreciate it. Thank you for putting together this podcast. I know we talked about this maybe a year ago on whether you should move forward with this or not, and I think the impact you've had on our enterprise and our Corps, and really the Army, has been significant. So congratulations to you for having the moral courage to start this up and allow me to be a part of it.
Well, thank you, sir, and I appreciate your kind words, so hopefully I can live up to them today. So, sir, I'd like to start off today and tell us a little bit about your Army journey.
Absolutely. So my Army journey really starts with my family. So my grandfather, who I had never met, served in World War I, and then my family throughout the years has served either in the Navy or Marine Corps. My dad was a sergeant in the Army during the Vietnam era, and then I just decided to join my best friend in high school that I went to college with, joined the reserves, and he started going to ROTC at Washington State University, and I needed to start working out because I was gaining weight, and so I started going to PT with him there at Washington State University, and they approached me after a couple months of going to PT if I wanted a scholarship, and paying my own way through college. That's how I truly ended up in the Army, is I needed money for school. And I loved the people that I was hanging out with in the ROTC program. Phenomenal bunch of people and Americans. And so that's really what got me hooked on the idea of the military and serving with great people. So I joined in 2002 as a Medical Service Corps officer out of Washington State University, and my first duty station was in Camp Casey, Korea, as the Division Medical Supply Officer for 702nd Main Support Battalion, which doesn't exist anymore. It's now a BSB. That's how old I am. Great opportunity to learn what readiness is and training management under some phenomenal leaders. My next job was as a Detachment Commander and Chief Logistics in Carlisle Barracks at Dunham U.S. Army Health Clinic. Did that for 7 months before I volunteered to go to Iraq with an Army National Guard Brigade combat team out of Mississippi, the 155 Brigade combat team, deployed to Iraq as the Brigade Medical Supply Officer, and then became the S4 midway through that tour. After that deployment, I went to 62nd Med Brigade as the Property Book Officer and Deputy Brigade S4. 15-month tour there in Iraq, and then came back, and it was a Medlog Company Commander, followed by a MMB S3 job. Then my next duty station was at Fort Carson, Colorado, where I was the Group Medical Supply Officer for the 10th Special Forces Group. And then I went on an operational mission to Central Africa and South Sudan, and then I got a call asking me to be the Support Operations Officer for 10th Special Forces Group. So I came back, was the Support Operations Officer for 10th Special Forces Group for 18 months before I went to Command and General Staff College. For a year. While I was there, I went to University of Kansas, got my degree in supply chain management. And then I went to Germany for 2 years as the support operations officer for the MMB there, 421st. And then my last year there was the executive officer for the 421st. And I applied for long-term health education and training and was selected to be the joint staff intern on the joint staff as part of the joint staff surgeon. Spent the first year there in what we call the pit, learning the ins and outs of the joint staff, and I became a strategic planner in the J4 on the joint staff, planning for Korea and really the global campaign plans and the global war plans for each one of our problem sets. So think Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and then violent extremist organizations. While I was at the Joint Staff, I was selected for Battalion Command, and I went and commanded the 10th Field Hospital out of Fort Carson, Colorado for 2 years. And right when I got there, 6 months after I got there, COVID hit, and I spent the next year and a half deploying across the United States with my healthcare team, providing care to U.S. citizens in Seattle, California, San Antonio, and other locations throughout the United States. While I was in command, I was selected for Senior Service College and went to Eisenhower for a year. Great experience there with some great Americans, both in Department of Defense and outside the Department of Defense, to include in industry fellows, where I learned a lot from them as well as the instructors. So it was very beneficial for me to go there and learn from them. And then I went to Army Medical Logistics Command as the Director for Strategic Initiatives Group, where I worked on medlog and campaigning, which is the integration of medlog into the Army Sustainment Enterprise. And now I am the 6th Medical Logistics Management Center Commander and also the consultant to the Surgeon General for medical logistics.
And also my boss there on the consultant side. So I appreciate you sharing what an incredible journey you've had. And I would be curious, like, what role has continuous learning and personal development played in your leadership journey?
Well, I think it's huge. I'm a big believer that every interaction you can learn something. And I use this story a lot when I talk to junior officers. If you're in a meeting and you're not paying attention to how somebody's briefing and how the leader is receiving that information, whether good or bad, you're losing an opportunity to learn from that interaction, right? And that should hopefully make you better. But not only that, if you're the 4 and the S1 is talking, you're going to learn about personnel. And that's going to make you a better leader because you're going to be more well-rounded and understand. Because at some point, you're going to lead soldiers. Is at a company commander or battalion commander level, you're going to understand what are the systems available to support the people that you lead, that you're entrusted to lead. So I think every interaction is a way to learn and get better. But every day, you got to spend about 15 to 20 minutes. What I do is I block on my calendar and I'll read a book, or I'll read an article online from Harvard Business Review, or something that interests me. It doesn't necessarily have to be military focused or supply chain focused. It could be something that just interests you outside of that, because you can't really dive into what your specialty is all the time, right? You've got to expand your horizons. That makes you a better leader over time, I believe. So some things I've done over my career is you can take classes online through Harvard or MIT to get smart on data. SAMS didn't work for me on my career path, so I asked somebody that was in SAMS to send me this is how big of a nerd I am, to send me what they were doing, and I would read all the books. What I didn't get was the discussion and the whiteboarding that they do in SAMS, but I would read the articles and books on that syllabus just to get an understanding of what they were looking at if I was going to be a strategic planner or understand strategy. And I think those type of things helped me when I was on the Joint Staff, or be able to talk with line officers or a naval officer when we're talking about strategy, when we're talking North Korea or something like that. So I think every day you just take an opportunity to improve yourself, whether that's through podcasts, books on tape, through Audible, or just sitting down and having a conversation with somebody that's outside your wheelhouse that has a different perspective on life and leadership. And those little nuggets over time might not trigger something right there, but 6 months down the line, you might find yourself in a situation you're like, well, this person used this tool and let's see if it works here.
So it's interesting that you talk about reading, because I found for myself, I remember when I was a lieutenant, and every senior leader, and even today, Chief of Staff of the Army has a reading list, but everyone wanted to shove their reading list down your throat, is what it felt like. And I remember thinking, gosh darn, why does everyone have a darn reading list, and why do I have to read all these things? And it wasn't until I personally got to CGSC for my intermediate level education that I had a professor who said, the reason everyone has a reading list and wants you to read is in the lack of experience, you can get insight and knowledge from others' experience. And I was like, well, why didn't anyone ever say that like that before? Why was it just the reading list? So I appreciate you sharing how you've made it a part of your own self-development and your journey and how you've used it. So thank you for sharing that insight. So as a senior leader in the AMEDD, what kind of vision do you have for mentoring within the AMEDD and the Army?
Well, that's a great question. I think senior leaders have to be open to mentoring. So I've been told throughout my career, 360s, that I'm intimidating. Now, I'm 6'3", a bald guy, 220 pounds, so a big guy, and people are sometimes afraid to come up to me because of that stature, right? And maybe I need to smile more. So senior leaders really have to seek contact is what I think it is, right? If you were at a venue or a location and you're standing and waiting for a lieutenant or a captain or a sergeant to come up to you, you're probably not going to be seen as somebody that can approach and seek mentorship from, right? And mentorship is a special relationship, so there's mentorship, coaching, there's teaching, right? As we all know, there's different definitions for all of those things, and so we have to be precise on that, as I've learned over the past couple of months. But that mentorship journey is really that relationship built over time, but you, I believe, as a senior leader, have to seek out that first contact, right? And then they'll see you're open to that and you're somebody that they maybe can trust in the future, because that relationship is really built over time. And so I mentor probably 5 people in the Army, right? There's a lot of people that I will talk to and I'll give advice to, and they can, this is what I'm dealing with, and here's some ways, some techniques you can do there. But those are one-offs where they're calling me, and it's not a routine basis where there's those 5 people where I'm also contacting them to say, here's what I'm dealing with. And from your perspective as a major or a captain or a sergeant first class, tell me how you perceive this, or how would you receive this if I say it this way, right? Just to roll ideas off them when I'm having leadership challenges of how I can be a better leader from their perspective, because each person sees things through a different lens. So what I am saying as a leader may not be received as I think it's being delivered. And I think that's critical. So my vision for mentorship is we just, as senior leaders, we have to be open to it, and we have to seek that first contact, I think, and then just be vulnerable, right, and speak to what challenges you have. Too many times we want to put the armor up and say, hey, I'm Hughes, and I'm not going to tell you all the struggles I had, because then you wouldn't think I'm Hughes, right? And so I think I've learned as I share those stories of the struggles I've had over the last 22 years of service that they now see us as human beings and somebody they can trust and open up to and say, here's what I'm going through, and I need some assistance just either talking through it. We had a great example of this yesterday in a medlog symposium of sometimes people you just need to listen. Like my wife says, I don't need you to solve all my problems. Sometimes I just need you to listen. And that's sometimes the key thing you do as a mentor is just listen sometimes, and not necessarily say, okay, well, here's how you can solve that problem. Sometimes that's not what they're looking for.
Yeah, I appreciate your viewpoint, sir. We did this last week. We had the opportunity to be in the medical logistics symposium together, and a lot of amazing speakers. And we did talk about mentorship and that definition. And thank goodness recently the Army decided to codify what mentorship meant. And the old term of, hey, come into my office, I'm going to mentor you. And in your head as an officer, you're thinking, oh, heck no, I don't want to go in the office. It really is a voluntary relationship, and it does have a mutual trust that's built in. So I would almost relate it to like a professional friendship, if you will, because that's the level of interaction there needs to be for it to be mutually beneficial to both parties. I myself have found it invaluable to have mentor-mentee relationships, and I appreciate the mentor-mentee relationship that we've developed over time as well. I think what's interesting is when people try to establish mentorship relationships, how sometimes that can be awkward. Sometimes someone might see, hey, I see that you have the same energy as this other officer and I want to connect you, which you and I actually had that. And I want to share it with the audience because I think it's important. So you worked for Colonel Roy Vernon, an amazing leader, and then he went on to be my boss. And when he was working with me, and I was just a captain at the time, he said, hey, you're a medlog officer. I think you need to meet this other amazing medlog officer, Major Hughes. Here's his number. Reach out to him. I think you should talk to him. And I remember I was so scared. I was like, why would I reach out to a complete stranger who, A, I've never met, I've never talked to? That would be so awkward. And so I didn't do anything. And what I didn't realize is that Colonel Vernon had already reached out to you and said, hey, I told Stephanie to reach out and talk to you. So fast forward years later, you become the consultant and my new boss, and I confessed that to you, and you had a good laugh about it. because you were waiting, and the phone call just took years to happen, I guess, sir.
But to your point, I think I'm the one that failed on that, right? When I talk about seeking contact, so I did not reach out to you. I waited for you to reach out to me, and that's over the years, right? I think that's where I've changed my mindset on how that should work. So yes, Colonel Roy Vernon, phenomenal leader, one of my great mentors and friends. And in fact, now his wife is my boss and great teammate there as well. But again, he oftentimes, and she will do this as well, she'll send officers my way. And now I don't wait for the captain or the major or the lieutenant colonel to reach out to me. I now seek contact because I know that's a scary first step for junior officers, especially if you've never met that person. You don't know what you're getting into and you're like, maybe not. So I apologize for not seeking contact, but I'm glad we now have that relationship.
I think that's a great point. I think we have to, as leaders, if we're more senior, we have to make ourselves accessible because we forget what it was like to be a lieutenant or a captain or a sergeant or a staff sergeant. And you're looking out at someone who's already ahead of you where you're trying to be, but you don't have the experience to know like how tough the journey was to get there. So you think they're the untouchables, if you will. So I appreciate you bringing that to light. So how has your personal experience shaped your views on the importance of leadership in the military?
Well, I think leadership is the single most important factor on any organization's success or failure. Right? You can be the best logistician in the world, and if you can't lead, then your organization is not going to go anywhere. Right? So I think I've had leaders that have invested in me over the last 22 years and continue to invest in me. Those that have retired, those that are still in, but they invest in everybody. So you can go to some organizations and you can, okay, who's a superstar? And everybody knows who that is. And a lot of times senior leaders or leaders will focus on that person because they see a lot of them in that junior leader. Where we miss the mark is the ones that are struggling or the ones that are in the middle. And that's where your sweet spot is. So my views of that is many times when I was younger or say a mid-grade major is I would focus on the superstars and I wouldn't necessarily spend a lot of time with those that were struggling. And that was my shortfall as a leader. So now what I do is I look at those that I know I can make the biggest impacts in their leadership journey. And people have invested in me, and now I look at, okay, how can I invest in them, and how do I link them up with people? So I might not be the best coach or mentor to that person, right? And especially inside your organization, there's the command relationship, and maybe they're in the first couple of months of that relationship, they're fearful or they don't want to open up to what their issues are. And then over time, that you build that relationship and they start to open up, right? Just because of the evaluations and those type of things. Once you break down those barriers, then you start to see the increases in how they perform. So I have a network of leaders that I know that person would match up great with that person. And then I don't just send an email. I link them up on Teams, or when they come here to visit Fort Detrick, I'll make sure that they have an opportunity to meet that person and start that relationship, whether it blossoms into a mentorship or it's just somebody that they know they can contact 2 years down the road where they're facing some other issue maybe in their career. So I just try and replicate what is done for me or what I've seen work with others, because again, you have to always have your sensors up and look at how other people are leading and how they engage. And I think I don't have all the answers, but if I don't, then I know somebody that does. I know somebody that may be able to reach somebody and break down those barriers. And then you start to build trust with that person, and they'll start opening up into you as well. So I think that's how my personal experience has shaped how I execute today.
What I get out of hearing you talk is the aspect of both that investment in the sensors that you say you have up. It definitely sounds very intentional. Like it sounds like you go into each day as being a commander and leader with intentions, and that awareness that, hey, I have to now look out for that investment in others because it was given to you. So I think that's a really important aspect of leadership. We don't just come in every day and are leaders, right? We have to have our intentions of being leaders. And what are the attributes of that? What are the characteristics of that leadership?
But that goes back to that continuous improvement. If you think that you've made it any day, you come to work and like, okay, I'm the best I've ever been and there's nowhere to go, then I think you're failing those that you lead. So again, you can always get better. And that's one of my favorite questions to ask those that I lead. is how can I be a better leader for you? And the feedback you get is irreplaceable, right? I mean, and you will tell the ones that trust you because they'll be very honest with you, right? And you as a leader just have to be able to accept it and not push back on it, right? And then you have to be intentional about how you address that leadership shortfall, because they're really the consumers of your leadership. And if you can't listen to them and then be able to change yourself, because in the old days, you'd have one leadership style and everybody just had to bend to whatever that was. And nowadays, individuals want to be led individually. And if you don't understand what that is by not asking that question, then I think you're ineffectual as a leader when you look at your entire organization.
Absolutely, sir. And what's great about that route to take with leadership is when you give your people that you lead that individual touch, you're also empowering them to really be themselves, empowering them to bring the best of themselves to the mission set. And I would say that you probably also find solutions to challenges that you wouldn't have found otherwise, right? Because it's not just fall in line and this is what you do. You give folks enough leeway to come up with solutions that you perhaps didn't even think of as the commander or the leader in that situation.
Absolutely. And the hope is that they ask that question as leaders as well.
So, sir, I think we covered this, but what do you see as the biggest challenge facing leaders in being mentors? I know you talked about approachability, but whether it's environmental, our operating environment that we currently find ourselves in, or just our culture, what do you see as some of the biggest challenge facing leaders to being mentors?
The challenge that we have is we're too busy. I mean, a lot of times we're busy being busy, right? And that's where you have to be in. You talk about leading with intention. You have to build that time in. You have to call people with intention. So I drive for an hour and a half each day up to work and back home, and I use that time, especially if I'm on the East Coast. So if I have people that I mentor or that I just want to talk to and see how they're doing, especially on the Central or West Coast time, I'll use that time to give them a call and just see, how are you doing? What can I do for you? What are your challenges and how can I help? Right. And so I think just time management is a huge aspect of that. Too often we get too busy on the things that we have to do that we forget to do the things that we should be doing. So that means getting out of the office and just walking around and talking to people. You have to be intentional about that. And if you can't be intentional about that, then ask your sergeant major or your XO to come grab you out of the office and say, let's go for a walk, right? So, but we have the technology now, Teams, you have your phone, everybody's got a phone. There's no excuse why you can't be more effective as a mentor or as a leader for multiple people, not just those that are inside your command or your office building, but almost on a global level now because of those things that we have to interact with people that my dad didn't have, or maybe generations before me did not have.
So when you talk about not just in your formation, I think that's a great discussion point, especially when going back to both that aspect and talking about how you used to just focus on the superstars. So, most people are familiar with the bell curve. And when you look at the bell curve, the majority of the workforce is going to be in that 80%. The 10% on the left is going to be your top performers. The 10% on the right is your lowest performers. And we do tend to do that in the Army, at least from my experience. We focus on that top 10%, but really there's that huge 80% in the middle that was really doing the majority share of the mission set and really offering the stability to an organization in accomplishing that mission. And I would say we underutilize that 80% in the middle oftentimes, because if you're on that end of the 80%, what's the investment being put in those officers or NCOs? So I appreciate you bringing that to light, because I think we are so focused on what's right in front of us, we forget that there's a bigger holistic picture to this as leaders.
Yeah, well, I think a critical point there is that 100% of your people are important. And even if you think those bottom 10% may not have a life in the Army or in the Department of Defense, they will have an impact on America. Right? They are oftentimes the ones that will go out there and could be our best recruiters if we take care of people, right? So you have to spend your time across that 100%. A lot of times the high performers, sometimes people won't do anything with them because they're thinking they're good, right? But they need investment as well. Sometimes you need to be told you're not as good as you think you are, because we can always improve on something, right? Nobody is perfect. We all fail at something each and every day, I guarantee it. Some people just aren't perceptive enough to understand that they're failing at certain things, right? Whether that's an interaction with somebody where you could have done better or something in the workforce. But everybody deserves great leadership. And so if you're thinking about that 10, and then 80%, the 80% are the ones that do the majority of the work. So that's where you can make the greatest impact if you think about organization. But those bottom 10% deserve great leadership and investment in them as well, because they can move into that 80%. And now you can maybe have a high performing organization of 90% of your people are doing great work, and then you have that 1% that's just phenomenal, right? But they deserve investment too, and too often we don't do that.
I absolutely agree, sir. And I've had my own personal experiences. Some of my worst soldiers have ended up being my best NCOs. And it's amazing when you see both your team take the time to invest in those potential low performers and see them, because someone actually, to be frank, cares, that they are empowered, and it's almost something magical, not to sound all fairy tale like, but it's amazing to see when people are given time and someone cares enough to invest in them, how much they can grow. And I think that's an underutilized investment that we currently take. We're very much in a error-free, no mistakes culture currently. And I think we have to be a part of trying to change that.
It comes down to counseling, right? And when you talk about, do I care? Too often we don't want to be honest with people. We don't like to have that tough conversation. And one of the ways you can do that is it's not by attacking the person and their ineffectualness on what they execute for the organization, right? It comes down to the situation, the behavior, and the impact, either positive or negative. And if you use that type of framework when you counsel people, you're taking away the personalness of you failed. No, that's not. We just need to work on some of the things that can help us be successful as an organization. So if you distill it down to situation, here's what happened, the behavior, this is what we saw, and then the impact, either positive or negative, on the organization, then you help them see how what they did or did not do, right? That could be for positive and both negative aspects of this. If you use that framework, you take away that personalness of you failed the organization. No, that situation could have been done better by this behavior. Right. And in the future, and that's when you come back and say, okay, well, this next time we executed this, the range or this training event or whatever it might be, you see the impacts you had, right? We increased readiness this way, or now you're building them back up to show them that they're important to the organization and where we're going. And then they start to buy in of, okay, I can have an impact. I can be what I need to be for the organization. But you have to be willing to have that tough conversation and be honest with people. But then you have to be willing to give them a roadmap and help them throughout the way, right? So if they continue to struggle, now I will place myself as a leader next to them, and we'll talk through decisions and how we're going to execute and why that's important.
Absolutely, sir. And thank you for sharing a good TTP in execution. So I'd be curious, in your time, how many strategies or programs have you seen be successful in mentoring junior officers? Did any stand out?
So I don't know if I've ever experienced a program where mentorship was in an organization. I will tell you what the Army Medical Department does well for those that are going into senior service college. So when you go into senior service college, you get an email from Army's Office of the Surgeon General, and they say your mentor or your coach for over this year, somebody is this general officer. So they link you up in the beginning of the year. You have a discussion. One, because they've been to war college and they can talk about their experiences. But two, it's just talking about what's important in the Army Medical Department, but what's important to you and your family, right? The general officers are very good with that. Mine was Major General Mike Place, phenomenal leader, just retired, who helped me through what I should be focused on during senior service college. And it wasn't necessarily you have to read everything and you have to be the best student or the number one student there at Eisenhower. It was, we have to seek out a balance where you're learning and you're going to come back to the force with benefit and help us get better, but you also need to focus on your family and make sure you spend time with them at those things that maybe you weren't able to as a battalion commander, or you won't be able to as a brigade or 06 commander in the medical department. So that is one mentorship thing that I wish we would do more of, and maybe not the GOs, because we don't have a lot of those, and they're focused on the senior service college attendees, which is perfect, I think. But brigade commanders are currently there, linked up with lieutenant colonels that are getting ready to go into battalion command would be, I think, a great opportunity. And then you think about lieutenant colonels going to colonel and majors in CGSC or ILE or something like that. I think would be an expansion of that program that would help really build our entire profession and make those linkages. Because at the end of the day, if I know who to call when I face a crisis and I might not have the answer, that just builds that network and it'll make us more effective as an entire enterprise.
I love the idea and I love the concept of it, sir. And you also just shared something new. So something I didn't even know that we did. So I appreciate you sharing that. And that would have been fantastic. If I could have talked to someone before I went to CGSC, I probably would have not gotten so many white hairs that are coming through. The stress of the unknown, right? And the not knowing how you can mentally prepare yourself for the next thing that everyone looks at as, wow, you're going to senior service college. Wow, you got picked to go to CGSC. Innate pressure that's built in when you get selected for these things, because not everyone gets selected. So I think that's great that there's that ability to provide that mentorship and coaching and help people really I think it also probably helped you take full advantage of war college versus letting the stress of it and the unknown kind of, take wings and take you on a journey you didn't want to go on. So, sir, one of the things that I also wanted to talk to you about is you are the founder and creator of the Medical Service Leader platform that is on Facebook and is also now through, I believe it is the platform for blogging as well. Yeah,
so we have the Medical Leader, and I don't even know the platform, so forgive me on that one, where we'll publish articles. But when I was a battalion XO, I started posting once a week on the 421st MMB's Facebook page, just article synopsis of things that I've read that I thought were important for our force. And one of the ways you can reach out to the younger generation is through social media. But after I was complete with battalion XO time, and now Major Brian Thorson, who was my S3 when I was a battalion XO, I cajoled him into this. So, I created it. We co-founded this, and I know he's been on your podcast, Phenomenal Leader. We co-founded this and started every day writing synopsises and sharing leadership articles or articles on medicine topics, whatever we found interesting. And one that held us accountable to our leader development journey, knowing that I had to read something each day, so that held me accountable. And then I had to provide relevant feedback to the force on what I learned from that, just giving them a snippet where maybe they would invest in themselves and open up the article, or at least they got the key points that I could share with them. So that's why I created it, not selfishly to make myself better, but really to share those lessons with the force. And now it's grown to, I think we're over 9,000 people that are a part of that community. And now we have, so it's Brian Thorson, myself, Colonel Moore has access to it, and that's where she posts her podcast and shares articles there. And then Captain Nicole Fuss, who's actually an Army Nurse Corps officer who was a company commander underneath myself as a battalion commander, who's with the SFAB out of Fort Carson, publishes phenomenal content on there as well. So we've actually expanded it from just Medical Service Corps. Now we have Nurse Corps on there as well. And we probably need to rebrand as something like the Medical Leader, but something that I take great pride in and hope it's helped others on their leader development journey as well.
And sir, since we both are still just drinking our coffee, it is on the platform called Medium. So okay. I apologize I didn't let you finish your cup of coffee before I asked the hard questions. So sir, and just for the audience, that platform you put out there, and it was anonymous. So there were several years that no one really knew who was behind it. It offers some incredible insights to other readings. I think what I appreciated about it early on, before I even knew who was behind it, was the fact that I don't always have the bandwidth to sit down and read a book, but getting highlights of something or even an article on someone else's thoughts on a book or a reading, it helps me go, oh, okay, is this something of value to me right now where I'm at as a leader? And okay, do I want to make the investment then to read this book? I think oftentimes with reading, people think they have to start a book from front to back and you have to finish it. But at least in my own reading journey, I've learned that's not the case. I read haphazardly, so I'm always reading like 3 or 4 books at a time. So I guess that's my nerd moment. But I will look at the content, the table of contents, and hey, you know what? This chapter sounds interesting. I'll read it. If nothing else sounds interesting on the table of contents, I will move on. Or I will read it to a certain point, and if I feel like this is boring the heck out of me, or I'm really not getting much from this, I will abandon ship and I will move on. And I think we have to be more willing to do that. And I think reading is less intimidating if we go about it that way. So, sir, I would be curious, looking ahead, what are your own goals for mentoring as a senior leader in the AMEDD?
One of my goals is just be more available to those that want to seek out mentorship. So every 70 kilo or medical logistics course at Joint Base San Antonio, I go down as a consultant. One of the great pleasures I get as the 70 kilo consultant to the Surgeon General is I'm able to go down there once a quarter and talk to those interested in being medlog warriors. And they're usually at the captain and lieutenant level. And I get to talk to them about what I've experienced. And hopefully what that does is inspires them to reach out in the future, but also know that they're not alone in their journey. And what I experienced may not be what they experienced, but at least we can talk through that. And I give them multiple examples of things that I've struggled with throughout my career, and hopefully opening up to them and showing me some compassion and vulnerability from my aspect will help them understand that it's not a no-fail organization in the United States Army, as long as you learn from those failures, and that if they do fail or they find themselves in a challenging situation, that they have a network of leaders that are prepared to step up and help them through that challenge, whether that's a personal challenge or a military challenge or a professional challenge, whatever it may be, that they can either contact myself or the team of deputy consultants. We have phenomenal, talented leaders of those at major and lieutenant colonel if they don't feel comfortable talking to a colonel. But it's really building out that network, not necessarily just calling up Hughes, but that network across the 70 kilo medical service corps that's able to help them through those challenges. Because I think many times when we send leaders out, especially at the junior level, they're alone and unafraid because they're the only medical service corps officer in that infantry battalion or in that BCT, and oftentimes they don't know who to contact. And that's really, it's building that lifeline of, you can call me at any time because I give my contact information. And if for some reason I'm overseas or I can't handle it, I can push it off to somebody that I know that will be able to take care of that officer and make sure they're successful.
You bring up the officers in the BCT, and I think that's been one of the AMEDD's biggest challenges as it regards to how do we build a community, how do we build support, how do we provide information, how do we provide mentorship. And I will tell you the officers at the division and the corps are more critical than ever. And at least in my experience, they often miss the mark on realizing how much influence and impact they can have. And I know that working on division staff is tough. I know a lot is thrown at, oftentimes we either have the kilo or the hotel and we don't have both there. Same with the corps level, but their ability to, I think, touching those officers, bringing others in to provide, whether it's leader professional development, is so critical. And I share that because I really want to sound the horn. Hey, if you're in the division and corps and you don't know how to teach mentor, but please, you need to reach back, the officers you already know, so that we can help bring that sense of community. Because the reality right now is we are going through a tremendous amount of change in the Army. Not just the AMEDD, not just with DHA, Defense Health Agency, but the Army as a whole. And we have to ensure that we can continue to develop that talent that becomes the next Lieutenant Colonel Moore, that becomes the next Colonel Hughes. And I wanted to share my thoughts on that because I see an opportunity that I think we're still missing out on.
100% agree. I think we talked earlier about busy being busy, and the majors at the division level, I think, are critical. And when I talk about seeking contact, they have to get out from behind their desk. One of the ways the Corps Chief, so Major General Talley, has made it one of his priorities is to stand back up the Silver Caduceus Societies. They've started to do like worldwide Silver Caduceus Society on NMS teams, which is a phenomenal effort, but it's really getting those majors and those lieutenant colonels at those division post camps and stations to set things like that up, to bring medical service corps officers together so they, one, know there's others like them on post, and two, for leaders to share their lessons learned. And the Corps Chief's office will send us out to those events and put leaders on planes to make sure that we're able to be there and help influence that process. So Fort Campbell just did a great Silver Caduceus Society where they brought the 70 Hotel, the 70 Alpha, the 70 Kilo consultants and others, the 70 Bravo consultant, to talk to the junior officers about what opportunities are out there for medical service corps officers, but to share some leadership lessons learned. And again, just letting them know there's a community out there to support them. And I think those are critical. And those are easy to set up. There's no bylaws anymore. There's none of this. You have to have a president and a secretary and all that stuff. It's just an opportunity to get the team together to say, this is who I am, this is where I'm at, and I'm here to support you. Because there's leaders outside of the division when you have medical brigades there and hospital centers and field hospitals and MMPs. Those leaders are invested in making sure you're successful. We just have to build the platform to bring that team together.
I appreciate you sharing that. Yes, so the 360 Silver Caduceus, it's phenomenal. The Corps Chief's office has done a great job setting that up. They're also on Mill Suite, so they will post the slides on there as well. And I will make sure that we include the Silver Caduceus Society link in this episode. So, sir, we talked a lot about the senior leader needs to be the one that reaches out and initiates. But what advice do you have to someone who wants to be a mentor, but how do they get brave? How do they get the courage to do that? Because that's not easy for just anyone to reach out to juniors that they might not necessarily know to initiate that kind of relationship.
You just got to do it. I mean, it's like I had a lieutenant one time in my office of Battalion XO. He's like, I'd really like to run a marathon. And he's now a major. He just ran the Boston Marathon, raised a bunch of money for cancer research. Phenomenal officer, now a 70 Alpha. So I failed as a 70 Kilo. But I told him, I'm like, well, just do it. What are you waiting for, right? And I think if you're not willing to make that first step, then you'll never do it. It's like anything else in life, right? When I was going to go propose to my wife, I was nervous as heck. But you just got to do it, because if I didn't, then I would be married to my beautiful wife. We wouldn't have 2 kids. She probably would have tracked me down eventually, I guess. But you have to do it, and you have to be willing to listen, and you have to build trust, right? So not everybody that you reach out to is to become a mentee, and you have to be aware of that as well. That doesn't mean that you missed the mark. It's just you didn't have that connection, right? But that's okay. But they know that they're able to call you up at any time and get advice, and advice is worth its weight in gold. And you don't necessarily have to be a mentor. It's just knowing that they can call you up. And that's what I offer. We do not become mentor-mentee relationship. We not build that relationship, and that's okay. But to know that there are people out there that have your back, that are invested in making sure it's successful, I think if you do that, you'll be successful as a leader, as somebody that they can trust, and it'll make our entire enterprise better.
Well, everybody listening, you just got to just do it. That's awesome advice, sir, and I agree with you. I will tell you for myself, I found that things open up in an amazing way when you just jump off the cliff and just do it. So, sir, we talked about different platforms and reaching out to folks, but how are we or can we use technology, social media to integrate mentoring within the AMEDD?
Well, I think, one, you can't be afraid of it. There's been times in the past where leaders have misstepped on social media, and now people are afraid to use it. There's a phenomenal leader, former MP colonel who taught it. His name's Mr. Dwayne Wagner, just retired from teaching at CGSC. He has no idea who I am, and for some reason, I think Brian Thorson had something to do with this. He friended me on Facebook, and through his just page, mentors people on race, leadership, whatever it is, right? Phenomenal leader. I've never met him. We've never talked. But he's a mentor to thousands of people that he doesn't even know he's a mentor, to include myself. So senior leaders just have to be willing to have honest conversations on social media to give insights and impact. There might not be a discussion back, but you're mentoring people just by your actions on providing your thoughts. It's also writing articles. I just wrote one from the Green Notebook. Joe Brierley, who's a phenomenal leader in himself, and put together this platform, and that's the second article I've written. One was on the family contract, is something I've done as a leader, and the last one I wrote was about the question I think every leader should ask is, how can I be a better leader for you? It's writing, it's putting yourself out there. It's being willing to have a conversation on social media, where that's on X or the other platforms that I probably don't even know exist because I'm 46 years old. So it's also keeping up with that as well. You can't be if you're on MySpace right now and you think that people are going to interact with you, you're probably off target. So just use technology to its greatest benefit and put yourself out there, and don't be afraid to do it.
Does MySpace even exist anymore? I don't think so.
No idea.
No, and although I have not written the articles, I have found that at least in writing a short little blog post on my social media platforms, at least what I've experienced also as a leader, is I feel like it also has a benefit as you as an individual, because when you write your thoughts and opinions and then you reread it, which that's the key there, reread it, make sure you're not putting something crazy in the universe, it gives you insights to yourself as well. Because you really have to deep dive in, okay, what are my thoughts as a leader? How do I see this? How do I interpret this? And then what is maybe an actionable item that I can share with others that's worked for me? And at least that's how I've seen the writing journey. I am no means as comfortable as you are in the writing space, but there is definite value into doing that as a leader.
I mean, you have to be intentional. And there's a team of people behind each one of these. So from the Green Notebook, or if you write for us as medical leader, that we do iterations of that. So my first draft of that article, the team from the Green Notebook sent it back to me multiple times of hey, maybe this or that, right? So don't be afraid. I have help from editors on everything that I write, thank goodness. But yeah, you just have to do it. And you can't be beholden to the likes or shares. So if you write something, even if you've challenged one person to think something differently, then you're successful. But if you're thinking you're going to get 1,000 likes or something, or be discouraged if you don't get that, then put that off to the side. That's not why you do it. If you touch one person, then that's success.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't realize that making a difference in just one person's life could come at the pivotal moment in time that makes a difference for that individual. And you may never know of that, but that individual might go on to do that for someone else. And that's really how that community sparks the fire and provides that support. And then it gets around. Hey, this person gave me this insight and helped me, and I'm going to share that insight with you. And before you know it, it comes full circle. So, sir, we've talked a lot about mentorship and leadership today. So I'd be curious, what is the best career advice you've either ever received or have given?
So the best career advice I've ever received was from now retired Colonel Tony Nesbitt, one of my mentors. And he told me, you're not as good as what you think you are. And to a junior officer, I was like, well, I think I'm pretty good. And really what that did for me is it helped me reassess my leadership journey. And he was absolutely right. I mean, sometimes we drink our own Kool-Aid too much and we think too much of ourselves, and then that gets us in trouble. And so it really recalibrated me at an important time in my career to think that you're right. I've got to keep getting better. You think about Kobe Bryant and some of the stories you've heard of him on how hard he practiced every day, and he was one of the best basketball players in the world, if not the best at one time. And you think about Tiger Woods and Scotty Scheffler, who just won the gold medal in the Olympics. They're always trying to improve. They're not satisfied with where they're at today. And so that was an eye-opening moment for me as a leader who thought I was pretty dang good, and it recalibrated me. And every day, he doesn't know this, every day I thank him for that, because it helped me get to where I'm at today. And I know I'm not perfect. I know I'm not the best leader, and that's why I continue to listen to people. I continue to read, to learn from others, and reassess each day on how my interactions with people are and how I can be better as a leader. Maybe that's just in communication or just being a human being for my family as well. So I thank him for that. I think that's the best career advice I've ever received from a leader.
Well, thank you for sharing that advice and also insight to you and your journey as a leader. So, sir, before we end with a fun question, any additional thoughts on leadership or mentorship that you'd like to add or that we didn't cover?
I'll just give a couple points on leadership. One, don't ever be satisfied with where you're at today. And we just touched on that. You have to be open to others' feedback. So if you're not willing to ask that question, how can I be a better leader for you? You can ask the question. You're not open to the feedback of what somebody tells you, and you're not intentional about addressing those issues, So I'm a logistician, and nobody says thank you to the logistician. The only time you ever hear anything is if you don't deliver, has been my experience. And so it's very hard for me to, and I've gotten better on this because of feedback I received from a company commander. She said, I need you to come down and tell us we do a good job sometimes. That would be helpful for the morale of the organization, for me personally, just to know that I'm doing a good job. And she's a phenomenal leader, but she's right. If I execute my mission and nobody tells me anything, I know I did it well, and I'm going to move on to the next thing. So I had to be very intentional. I had to tell my sergeant major at the time, I had to put on my calendar of every week I was going to go down, because somebody does something well every day, and you as a leader just have to recognize that. If you tell people that, one, it reinforces that behavior, but two, it just helps keep them motivated, and then hopefully they'll do that. So you just have to be open to other people's feedback to know that you're not the greatest leader ever. And I think if you're able to do that and improve every day, then you'll be a better leader for those that you lead.
Well, thank you for sharing that, sir. And so we will slide into the fun question of the day. What is a fun fact about you? And if you don't have one, you can tell us your favorite ice cream.
All right. Well, I'm going to give you two. My favorite ice cream is mint chocolate chip. So if you want to have a mentorship or leadership discussion, bring me a mint chocolate chip and we'll be best friends for life. That's how you build trust with me. A fun fact about me is I have completed one full Ironman triathlon. And you can look up the distance on that, but I'll tell you, during the marathon of that, I was running next to a guy that was, I think he was 70. So I was in my mid 30s at the time. And I asked him, I'm like, why are you doing this at this age? Because at that point in the marathon, I was questioning life decisions about why I chose to sign up for this thing. Now I finished, thank goodness, but just to talk with him over that time, he said, well, if I'm not doing something like this, then I don't know I'm alive. And that was very profound for me to think, this guy, one, I'm struggling as a 36-year-old, whatever it was, 10 years ago maybe, and this guy's in his 70s. One, he's keeping up with me, so that was humbling. And two, he could talk, and I was really struggling. So a fun fact is I got beat by a 72-year-old at the Ironman triathlon, but he really influenced me and inspired me to every day be better, because I want to do, and I won't do another Ironman because, again, I was questioning life decisions, but if he can do something like that at that age, then why can't I do something at my age that impacts those around me? So I think that's, one, go do an Ironman triathlon, and two, listen to those around you while you're doing it.
Well, thank you, sir. Unfortunately, I will never take that advice to do an Ironman. That does not sound fun or enjoyable, and I would rather discover myself and my weaknesses in other fashions. But I appreciate you sharing, sir. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you and sharing your thoughts on mentorship and leadership. I appreciate you coming on today.
No, thanks for the opportunity, Stephanie. Appreciate you and fully support what you're doing with this podcast, and I hope that other leaders take up this challenge to share their insights with the Joint Force. So thank you for what you do.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Don't miss the next episode of the Be All You Can Be MSC podcast. Subscribe now and join our vibrant community of ambitious professionals who are taking their careers to the next level. The opinions shared on this podcast are the personal opinions of the guests and the hosts. They do not reflect the official position of the Medical Service Corps, the Department of Defense, or the U.S. government.